Hey, this is Greg, and welcome back to this programming and learning series in which I show you how to code a classic snake game from start to finish in MIT Scratch. In part one of this series, we created our snake head, we set up some of our game flow variables, and we built out a grid-based movement system and a game board which can be dynamically resized. So if you want to check out that, then I'll link it up above and then also in the comments below. But now let's go ahead and continue on into part two. We're going to make sure our snake head rotates when it turns. We're going to set up a script for randomly placing food pellets on the screen at set intervals. We are going to tackle the problem of how do we add body segments to our snake and get them to follow our snake as it turns and weaves the way around this board. And we even will get into things like detecting collisions, adding sound effects, and varying the color and growth rate for our snake body. So if that sounds like fun, let's jump right back in and let's pick up where we left off in part one. So let's get back into it. Okay, we've spent a lot of time here really making sure we follow a smart workflow, but that is time that's going to pay off in the long run. So thanks for hanging in there. We're just about ready to make this guy eat some food, give him some food to eat. But if you remember, we did have this one issue where we wanted his head to rotate when he changes direction. So let's see if we can fix that real quick. So I'm just here under my head here, which has somehow become renamed, but we're just going to call that head. Just fix that name there. So here I am under the head of my snake, and this is where he changes direction here. So what we want to do is when he changes and moves direction, we also want him to rotate. So let's grab this point in direction block, and if you do this, you can tell it which direction. So there's for up, and then we're going to duplicate that a couple times, duplicate that, separate these two. So this one will be for down. This one here will be for right, and this one here will be for left. And so I'm going to drag them into the corresponding. So here is for up, here is for down, here is for right, and here is for left. Now, I think we're going to get an error when we test this, and we'll see, and I'll explain to you why this is happening. So I'm going to hit Start Game, and you'll notice that now when he's going the different directions, he is rotating, but he's not pointing the correct direction. Now I can tell you why that is, and this is an easy fix and something we could have handled from the beginning if we had paid attention to how Scratch handles things. So if I come into the costume for this snake, what Scratch expects when you create a sprite, it expects that you're going to start with them oriented to the right. And this guy, we started with him oriented facing up. So if I grab this entire guy here and come in here and then just rotate him by 90 degrees so he's oriented to the right within this costume. Now if I come back and we run this again and start game, now we'll notice that I have him where he points and he is rotating the correct direction as we fly around the screen. So easy fix, just remember when you're creating sprites in Flash, try to always start with them oriented to the right, because then when you use that direction block, point direction, then it's going to correspond as you would expect and you will not get confused. Okay, with that fix in place, it is definitely ready to give this guy some food to eat. So we're going to go under sprites, we're going to do a new sprite, we'll call this sprite food, and we're going to go in there and give it its first basic costume. So let's zoom in. This time we're just going to take the little circle tool here and we'll change the fill to black. I guess it doesn't really matter, but this is going to be just a little food item. So I'm going to hold down that shift as I drag something out. So here's a 6x6 circle. Again, I'm going to make sure it's centered. And now we have this food. So I want this food item to randomly be placed somewhere along our grid. So let's talk about how we're going to do that. So first let me just go to the code and just temporarily I'm going to come in here under my controls, my events, and when clicked, and I believe there's something in here for making this guy draggable. So I'm going to set him as draggable for a second. Actually, maybe it's under the sensing menu here. Yeah, okay, so set mode to draggable. I'm just going to do that just so I can come in here and actually go within here and drag this guy around just so I can, hey, let me stop and hit play so we get that start game. So now he should be draggable. So I'm just going to drag him around here just to show you how we're going to handle this placement. So we know in here, based on our grid cell size, which is 10, we have 48 rows and we have 36 rows going up. So 48 horizontally, and then vertically here we have another 36 rows. So what I want to do is place this food pellet exactly within one of the columns, exactly within one of the rows, exactly centered, so it's going to be lined up with our snake. Now I can adjust the size of this guy if I think this food pellet is too big or too small. It's 6 pixels right now. We're not going to worry about that too much. But so if I randomly chose a number between 1 and 48 to get my row, and then I randomly chose a number between 1 and 36 to get my column, I could use that to place this guy. So if I randomly chose 1 for my column and 1 for my row, then he would get placed over here. So I would take that number and I would multiply it by 10, which would put it right here. And then, like we've done with some other things, I want to take half the grid size and half the grid size, and he would get placed right there. So hopefully that sort of mechanics for how we're going to randomly place our food pellet is going to make sense. So let's go back into our code and let's try this out. So come back into our code. We no longer need this draggable, and I'm going to create 2 variables to go ahead and store our X and Y position for our food. So let's make a variable. And we can leave this as for all sprites, and we're going to call this one food X to store the X position, and then for the next one we're going to call this one food Y, and that will store the Y position. So go ahead and click OK. All right, now remember our plan here. So let's go under operators here, and I'm going to grab this one and we're going to do a random number. Actually, don't get rid of this one. It's a random number between 1 and 48. And then we also want to duplicate that in a random number between 1 and 36. Okay. Not 136, 1 and 36. Okay. And then remember, we want to multiply this result by our grid size. So let me bring out another one of those. We're going to multiply this by our grid cell size. So let's find that variable down here. Grid cell size. We'll duplicate that once. And we'll put that up here, and then we'll put that up here. Now, that's going to give us position here, but then remember, when we're doing this, we're sort of starting at 0, 0 is right here, halfway in the screen. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to subtract 240, and I'm going to have to subtract 160 from the X and Y respectively there. So what I'm going to do then is come under these operators and have a minus, and we'll duplicate that. And so for the X, we're going to subtract 240, and from this we're going to subtract 180, because that's half of the 360. And so pick a random number between this, so all of this into here, and then all of this into here, and then we're going to store these in those variables. So we're going to set our food X to all of this. We'll drag one out, and we're going to set our food Y to all of this. Now, that's going to get it almost there. Remember, we're still going to have that half of a grid cell size. And so if we did this here, so 1, 1, and then we should have to subtract, I believe, half of the cell size. So all that, but let's do this first. And then what I'll just do is once we do this, we'll have to have a change food X, and this is where we'll grab those operators, and we'll do 0.5, and then once again by that grid cell size we'll just duplicate that. I didn't want to duplicate the whole thing, I just wanted to duplicate that. There we go, grid cell size, and let me just duplicate this. And so change food X. Actually, we'll duplicate this whole block and then change food Y. I don't actually need this here. So we have all of this. This sort of is the whole process for setting up the coordinates for a new food pellet. And then let's actually make a custom block for that. I'm going to make a custom block, and we will call this place food. Doesn't need an input. We'll go ahead and click OK. And so whenever we do place food, we're going to set these things, and then we're actually going to put a new food pellet at that location. So we're going to do, let's see, motion, go to, And this is where we're just setting it to the food X and the food Y, which we set above here, right? So variables food X. So we'll set the X to food X. We'll set this to food Y. Now, to make sure that this is working, all this is working here, let's run this in a forever loop for a second here when the game starts. So I'm going to come up here under control. We'll grab a forever loop and we'll wait some small amount of time. So let's just make it a half second. And then every time I do that, I want to run this place food. So my blocks place food. And now we're just going to step in there and we're just going to see if this appears to be working in terms of the placement. So we'll go ahead now and start this off. And we'll get onto our grid here. So it's jumping around. It's jumping around. Let's see. I had one that was pretty high up there, but looks like it's working. So a good idea here would just be to test the extreme bounds here to make sure that I'm getting them in the right position. So I'll just show you what I mean here. So let me just come out here. I'll stop this for a second. I'll drag this down just so I can see my corners here. So for example, if this was 1, 1, and let me just take this out of here for a second and just have one instance of this. So let me play this. If this was 1, 1, and then this was 1, I'm just making sure that it would go to 1 there. So if that goes there, let's see, where is it putting it? It is not putting it where it should. So in other words, I think where I did a right up here, let's see, what did I do? Oh yeah, so this is where I added 1. I knew that I wanted to do a negative here. I actually knew I wanted to subtract that, and I just forgot. So I'm just going to make these a negative 0.5, and so that will end up fixing, that should fix this problem. So now instead of it being here, we should see it bounce to that bottom corner. So boom, that works. And so I'm confident that that's going to fix the other ones too. But just to double check, let's check that upper right corner. So that would be 48. 48, and this would still be 1, 1, but so let's just do this and let's check. Actually, this is going to be the bottom right, but yeah, so there we go. That's working. And to check the upper right, we would want to set this Y to 36, 36, and run this again. Start game, and so yeah, there it is right there. So now we know that yes, we're covering all these things with our random number generators. So let's just go back and make sure we have this select correctly. And so this is working now. And so this will randomly place a food pellet somewhere within the grid. Now, do I need to do anything like use clones? Am I ever going to have more than one food pellet on the board at one time? Well, I could decide different ways to do this, but all I really want is there always to be one food pellet on the screen the whole time. So even just moving it when the snake gets to it is going to work. So what I'm going to do here is, let's see. So when clicked, let's see. Nothing is going to happen when clicked, so we're just going to come in here and we're going to go into looks and we're going to just hide it because again, we want it to receive that start game. Remember, we set up that start game event. So when I receive start game, that's when it's going to place the food. Now, the other time we want it to place the food is anytime the food gets eaten. So we need some sort of test for when the snake head is touching a food pellet, and then we want to move the food. So place the food again. So let's come in here and let's just run a simple check. So if we go under sensing, and we can do touching, and we want this to be touching the head. And again, I can do a test here. I put this in a forever loop. So once I start the game, I want it to always be testing this, right? So I'm going to duplicate this block just because we want this to be running always. And so control, forever, and forever, we're going to do this if touching head. And if it is, then once again, we are going to place food. So just duplicate this again. And so what this will do is, in essence, it's going to make it look like it's disappearing because we're just changing the coordinates, right? And so then also when this happens here, we're also going to want to trigger some other things. Obviously, we're going to want to add a segment to our body. We might iterate a scoreboard, but for now, let's just make sure every time the snake gets to a food pellet and touches it, this is happening here. And also, we might want a slight delay here so it looks like he's eating it rather than it just instantly disappearing when the tip of his nose touches it. But let's just see. Let's just see what happens. So let's go ahead and expand this out. I'm going to hide these variables now because we know these are working. So I don't need to be seeing all these variables on screen. I'm just going to get rid of those so we can better test our game here. So I will jump into it. And again, go ahead and hit play. So it hides it, right? Because we're not in the game loop yet. And now that I'm in the game loop, it is not showing a thing because what did we forget to do? We forgot to show it. So we have the hide block here. So then let's just come under looks and we want to show this the moment I receive start game. So show food and place food. Show place food. There we go. All right, so let's stop this and play it again. Play, start game. So there's the food pellet. Now if I go with my controls and get over and I touch that, then instantly you see we have a new one appear at a new location. So this is working. So we have these food pellets and I'm able to go along, and as soon as I touch that, I am basically what we would call eating this food here, okay? So this game mechanics is working. That's perfect. And now what we need to do is we need to progress past this and we need to trigger some other things, because what happens when we eat the food now, we want this snake body to grow in length by 1 segment, and we're going to want to iterate some sort of score variable because eventually we're going to have a scoreboard or some sort of score tracking in our game. Okay, so let's get to what I think is the most complicated part of this game, the most complicated of the game mechanics. And that is the fact that anytime the snake eats a food pellet, we want to add another body segment to the snake. But it's not as simple as going like 10 segments to the right if you're moving to the left and putting a new body segment there, because you also have to know all the twists and turns that your snake has made. So how do we handle that? Well, let's go over and look at our snake head here. And the good news is that we're working on this grid system, and at any point in time, we do know exactly where the snake head is. But to know the turns that it's made, we either need to keep track of the turns, or what I think would be even better, we could keep track of each individual movement that the snake makes. Now, this may sound complicated, but it's not that complicated actually if you take advantage of arrays, or what's called list here in MIT Scratch. So I'm going to build out a list for the X coordinate and the Y coordinate of the snake, and at the very beginning of the game, every time the snake moves, I want to add a new coordinate to that list, and then I'll show you how we can use that set of coordinates to actually position the new body segments, and also to control the movement of the new body segments to ensure that they follow the path of the snake. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is just a little game organizing here. Inside this forever loop, all of this is when my snake actually moves, so I'm actually going to put that inside a custom block. So I'll go ahead and make a block, and we're going to call this move snake, and I'll go ahead and click OK. And I'm going to take all this define move snake, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everything within this forever block, and we're going to put that right there, because forever we want to move this snake. And of course it's only going to move if one of the directions is set, and that happens as soon as the game starts and you press an arrow key. But so now this should work the same as it did before, but we have it a little bit more organized in here, and I can move this somewhere out of the way if I need to. Just lets me organize a little bit more. But let's just test. It's always good to test and make sure you haven't messed anything up. So start game, you can see that yes, all my movement works the same as it did before. I can come up, I can grab this food pellet, eat that, and a new one will appear. So I haven't broken anything. Everything works just fine. Now every time it goes through the forever loop, it's just calling this block, this custom block here. Now I'm also going to need another variable, a couple different things, a couple lists, and then also a variable. I know I'm going to have to track the number of body segments. So number, I'm just going to call this one again number body segments, because I'm going to need this if I'm building a list of XY coordinates where the snake has been. When I'm putting a new body segment and attaching it to the snake, I'm going to need to know how many body segments exist, so I know how far down in the list to find the position that that new body segment should be placed at. So that should make sense once we get in here, but I'm going to go ahead and call this a number of body segments. And of course, I can go ahead and initialize that at the beginning of the game here, which I could do here on the snake head, but I also could just do it on the stage here. And sometimes I like to organize sort of start a game variables here on the stage. So I'll go ahead and duplicate this, and I will set number of body segments to 0. So in other words, we're starting at 0. Now, every time I eat a food pellet, that's when we want to change this variable. So that's very easy. We go over to this food here. We have all of this here, and then forever if touching head, that's when we place the food. And then this is when we're touching, and so this is when we also, before we place the food here, or when we place this, that's actually this is the initial placement, and then this is actually when we're replacing it, when we actually eat the food, right? So I could actually put all of this into like an eat food thing if I just wanted to make it a little bit easier for myself to read, but I think I can handle it like this too. So it's sort of sometimes a judgment call how you want to organize your code. But what I want to do is come in here, and I want to change number of body segments by 1. Okay, so that way every time I eat the food, that should change by 1, and we could just run the game here, and we could test this out just to make sure that we're iterating that variable there. So it starts at 0, I eat 1. Now it says number of body segments 1. Of course, we haven't actually added the body segment, but this just confirms that yes, this is working. Every time I eat something, that variable is going up. Okay, so we'll head on out of here and we'll stop this for a second. And so now, how do we actually place that? Again, I mentioned we want to have a couple of lists to store the position of the snake. That's going to be the key to make all of this work. So we're going down to variables, and we're going to go down to make a list. We're going to call this one snake X position, just POS for position. We'll go ahead and click OK, and then we're going to make another one, and we will again call this snake Y position. Go ahead and click OK, and then these are both global lists, so any of my sprites can access these lists. But so what I want to do is every time the snake moves, basically forever in this game, this is going to be firing. So if I come back to my head here, this is keeping track of the position of the snake head. And so move snake. Every time I move snake, I want to keep track of where the snake was before I move him. So what I'll do is I'll come down here under this list, and I'm going to, let's see, add thing to snake position. Let's duplicate that and do add thing to snake Y position. And of course, what am I going to add? So if I just come here under my motion blocks, I can actually grab the X position, and I can actually grab the Y position. And so I can do that every time, and I'm actually just going to put it right within this define move snake. I think this should work, so let's just try that. And so now if I come in here, and let's just hit this, and let's just start the game. And now every time I move the snake, you'll notice that these are updating. So let's go ahead and stop for a second, and we'll scroll down to see, and it looks like this is working. You notice they just stay at -5 for a while because I wasn't moving, but then as soon as I started moving, this started populating. But so it's keeping track of all the time where the snake is. Now, just to make this a little bit easier to follow, I might slow this down for a second. So I may come in here and this wait 0.5 seconds. Let's just change this to a second for just for a minute. And the other thing I'm going to say is that whenever we start the game, whenever the game starts, we want to clear out these lists. So let me just make sure I do that before I get. So I'm going to come under these again, under the variables, and that's where we have the list thing. And so somewhere down here, we're going to have this delete all. So delete all of snake X position, and then delete all, if I duplicate that, of snake Y position. We're going to always want to make sure we do that when the game starts. It could also just be when the green flag is clicked there. So we'll go ahead, we'll do that, and then let's jump back over here, and let's just run this example real quick. And so now if I hit start game, you'll see that it starts to populate, and then as I start to move, you can see the numbers going up. So let me just do one where I just come out of here for a second, and let me go back under the snake head. And let's just have it where I move this so I can see a little bit better my start position. And I'm going to do one where I move instantly here. And I'm going to move along the x-axis. And so let me just show you that. And we're just going to stop this. And we're going to hit play. And we're going to hit start. And I'm instantly going to start moving to the right. And if you watch those numbers, 15, 25, 35. So it's instantly keeping track as I go of all the different movements I make with the snake. So if you think about this, at any moment in time, the bottom two coordinates here, my x position and my y position, represents the current position of the snake on screen. And then if I go back in time, as I go back, it's the prior positions of the snake. So if I had just the snake head, I could see that this would be the current position, and then I could place a new body segment at the prior location. If for some reason I had 5 body segments already, I know that they would be occupied by this position, this position, this position, this position, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so then I could go back to this, let's see. So 14, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then that would take me back to position 8. And position 8 would be where I would want to place that new body segment. So I want to be using this array and that number of body segments variable so that any time when it's detected that food has been eaten, I get the most recent body segment, the most recent location here, but then I take the length of this array, I go back the number of body segments, and that'll give me the position in the array where I can pull the coordinates and use that to place the new body segment. Okay, so let's try this out and let's see if this works, because this is a really smart way to tackle this problem. Okay, so first I actually have to create a new sprite that's going to be the body of our snake. And so just to remind myself, if I go in under the costumes here under the head of our snake, I can see that it's 8 pixels by 8 pixels. So I'm going to keep that same basic dimension of 8 pixels by 8 pixels. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to create a new sprite. I'll paint a new sprite. I'm going to zoom in a fair amount here. I'm going to grab that rectangle tool there. And my color, I think, was green. It doesn't matter if I get the exact same color. And I'll actually show you something we're going to do later in the game with the color here. I have a plan for that as well. So we'll make it fairly bright, fairly saturated. And the other thing was in green. So we'll get something that's sort of in that green realm again. Again, I don't think it's going to matter if we represent exactly what we had before. We could get the exact values, but it's not going to matter. So I'm just going to grab this here. And then I'll just come here, shift drag out on screen. I can see that's 9 by 9, so let me make it a little smaller. There's 8 by 8, and again, drag it and make sure it snaps to the center. Okay, so this is what we're going to use for our snake body. Okay, so now that I'm looking at this and drawing this out at 8 pixels, and then seeing that it looks significantly bigger than that, that clues me into that I actually think I made a mistake in our prior coding of this, and I'll show you what I mean. So this, you see how this is definitely bigger than this here. So let me just come back, because I think I made a mistake when I was going over that grid cell size and setting the size of the snake head before. So let me come back under the code for the snake head. Yeah, so this here, where I set size to 0.8 times grid cell size. Now I was remembering that 8 was the costume size of the head, and for the snake, and for the grid cell size, we're using a size of 10. But what I was forgetting is that I want this to be the 8%, the 80% is sort of baked into this sprite itself. So in other words, if I set this size of this sprite to 100%, well, 100% size is going to equal 80% of the grid cell size, because that's all baked into the fact that instead of as 8, this costume starts, instead of a 10, this costume starts as an 8. So what I did not need to do was to do this 0.8 times grid cell size. I just think I needed grid cell size in there. So grid cell size times 10, and let's just come in here and let's expand this out, and let me just hit play and let me hit start game. And so now if I look at that, that looks like now that is a little bit more appropriately sized. Okay, so just one quick fix there, and hopefully this is giving you some confidence, realizing you're not the only one to make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time when I'm coding. And the more you do it, the more you learn, and you just get quicker about sort of debugging your code and then getting right back to solving problems. Okay, so let's jump back over to this, and we're just going to call this one snake body, this sprite snake body. And then we're going to jump into the code here, events. And when the game starts, so when clicked, I'm zoomed way out here. Let's zoom in. When clicked, and when clicked, we want to do what? So let's come under here. We actually want to hide it when the game first starts. We want to hide this code block. Excuse me, we want to hide this sprite. And then if we think about it, anytime food is eaten, that's when we actually want to generate a new body segment. So we're actually going to, instead of just showing it, we're actually going to just create a clone. So if I come here under, actually let me jump over to the food right here on this food. And so when I receive start game, it goes, and then here is where food is placed, and then forever if touching, okay, right here. So right here, if we're touching the head, that's when the food is actually eaten, and then we're going to place new food, and we're going to change the number of body segments. So actually, let's change the number of body segments first, because we're going to want to have that before we broadcast the eat food thing. So we're going to change the number of body segments, and then we're going to do a new broadcast message. So I'm going to broadcast, and we'll call this one eat food, eat food. We'll click OK. And so now anytime that eat food, that is when we want to create a new body segment. So I'm going to come back over here, and we'll go under control and create clone. And so actually, let's go onto the backdrop itself. And here on the stage is where I'm going to drag out this when I receive eat food. And every time I want to do that, I want to create a clone of snake body. And so then if I go back to snake body, I can find the control or the event when I start as a clone. So I just got to come down here under control when I start as a clone. And so the first thing I want to do is when I start as a clone, that's when I want to set the position. Now this part is going to be super important, and we're going to have to be careful to make sure we get this right. Now remember, to get the position we want for any body segment, we're going to look at the current position of the snake, which is going to be the last item in this list here, the X position and the Y position. And then imagine it was the first body segment. Then we would go back one, so we would take the current position and we subtract the number of body segments. So that's 16, we subtract 1, that would take us back to position 15. And so these XY coordinates, this is where the snake last was, and so that's where the first body segment is going to go. However, keep in mind, your snake might grow to 10 body segments, to 20, even to hundreds of body segments. And so each of those body segments is going to have a different position in this list. And so we're going to have to track all those positions, and we can't just have some global variable that refers to snake X and snake Y or for the body segment. They're each going to have their independent XY coordinates. So when they start as a clone, we need to set up some sort of local variable for this sprite only, and they're each going to have separate coordinates, right, based on that. So this might make more sense as I set it up here. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to come in here under variables, and I'm going to make a new variable, and I'm under my snake body here, and I'm going to make a new variable, and I'm going to call this one position index. Position, I'll do underscore index. And very important that it can't be for all sprites. It has to be for this sprite only, because I need each clone to store its own separate independent value. So position index for this sprite only, I'm going to click OK. And what that index is going to do, it's going to refer to the index here in the X and Y table that's going to correspond to that initial position that the snake body segment should be placed in. And then to make that snake body segment proceed along the path of the snake, all we need to do is every time the snake head moves, we're just going to have it continue to go to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, and it should then follow the path of the snake. All right, so let's test this out. So what I need to do is come in here under variables, and I'm going to start, when I start as a clone, I want to set this position index, and what I'm going to set it to is the length of one of these lists. They're both going to be the same. And so I'll come down here and do length of snake position X. But then remember, we want to subtract from that the current snake body length, which if you remember now is a global variable. We're storing this number of body segments. And this number of body segments goes up 1 each time food is eaten. So here we have change number of body segments by 1, and we do that every time before we broadcast the eat food, which is then what is going to cause a new clone to be created. So in other words, if we go back to the stage, when we broadcast eat food, when I receive eat food, it creates a clone of snake body. And so that takes us to this part of the code right here. So we need to have this be the current length of snake X minus that number of body segments. So I'm going to come here under my operators and I'll pull out this one. And so length of snake X position, and then we're going to come in under the variables here, and we're going to find that number of body segments. So if we do this math every time a new clone starts, it should find the correct index, which is going to be the number of positions behind the snake head it should be, and you can use those starting coordinates to place this body segment. So to place it, what I would do is I'll come up here under my motion blocks. I'll grab this go to XY, and for this we have to come in, we have to get this position index of the list values here. So I'll come down to my variable blocks here, and I'm going to find this item of snake X, and we'll duplicate that, because then we're going to have item of snake Y. Okay, and they're both going to use that position index variable. So let me just come back over here and grab this position index. And if I duplicate that position index, we'll pop it down here. And so if I use this here, it should be grabbing those values here based on the correct position. Okay, so that should handle placing the initial placement of that body segment. But then remember, we still needed to move every time the snake moves, the snake head moves. And when it moves, all we need to do is have it go to the next index, right? Because it's just following along this path that's getting created every time the snake head moves. And when we do it this way, we don't have to keep track of turns and all that, because that's all built in to this here, to these coordinate systems, to these coordinates. Okay, so to do this, let's go right over here to the head. And what we want to do is we want to let it know every time the snake head moves. So we have this move snake script. And so why don't we just do a broadcast message that's always going to occur after it moves here, after the movement is made. So to do that, at the very bottom of here, the bottom of this move snake script, I'm just going to do a broadcast message. So we're going to come on over here and we're going to broadcast a new message under here, and I will just call this new message move snake. So every time the snake moves, it's going to broadcast this message new snake. So then if I come back to this snake body here, when I receive move snake, and then so remember what we wanted to do is we wanted to move to the next number in the list here. So all I have to do to make that happen is just come down here under this variable menu here, and I'm going to change move snake by 1. That way it's, or excuse me, change position index by 1. So it's just going to go to the next item in the list, and then I can duplicate this block here and then immediately make it go to the new position. And I can use that same position index because now we've iterated it to the next value. And so those few lines of code, that should take care of what is fairly a complex problem, but we've solved it in a really smart way. Now, to make sure we've solved it, let's go ahead and test this. Okay, but before I do, I see that right here when I start as clone, I'm gonna want to have a show block in there. Easy to forget this, but we want to do that to make sure every time it starts as a clone, it is going to show that new body segment. All right, so let's test this now. So I'm going to go full screen here. We're going to hit play. We're going to start this game. Actually, let me go back and hide all this other stuff so that we just have screen real estate to see what's going on. So I'm going to come in here. We know these lists are working, but I'm going to turn those off now. Number of body segments and snake position index. We can keep that if we want to, but let's just turn those off. We don't really need to see that right now. So let's go back in here. Let's start this game. And let's see if we have this working. So I still have the speed really slowed down for testing purposes. So let me just back out of this real quick. And let me come to the head here. And we had changed this delay, if you remember. So let me just find where we have this wait 1 second. And I believe we had this set to 0.05 as a good game speed. So again, that's something we can change. And maybe we will change as we go along in the game to make it harder. But there we go. So now we're moving along. And when I eat a pellet, it is putting a body segment. Now it looks like I am off by 1. So let's just continue to test this here. And so let's come along, and I'll have to think about why it's behind. But look, we can see that this is basically working. It started in the index 1 position too far back. So we'll look at our code and we'll look at why that's going on. But look at the way it is working, and it is following along. So this is really cool. We're most of the way there. Let's just go back and let's debug this one problem. Okay, so here is our code for moving the snake. And when I started to clone, I think the logic here is solid. So we're setting the position to the length of the snake minus the number of body segments. Let's just check out what we have over here on the head. And okay, so at the bottom of this move snake sort of custom block here, this function, I use the block broadcast move snake and wait. I make this mistake sometime where there are 2 blocks in here under your events, and one is just broadcast and the other is broadcast and wait. And what happens when you use this broadcast and wait button, it's going to have to run all of the move snake blocks that receive that before it continues on with the script here. So I think this sort of flow thing is enough to probably be what's causing the error. So let's just take that broadcast and wait block and let's replace that with a broadcast block. And let's see if that does the trick. So I'm going to come back in here again to test it. And I'm going to go ahead and start the game. And let's see what happens now. Perfect. So right now, instead of being 2 positions behind, it shows up directly behind the snake, which is what we want. So this is really cool because this is probably the biggest coding challenge we're going to face in this project. And now we have our main game mechanics working. And this is really cool. And so now I think we're really going to have a lot of fun because now we can really dig into the gameplay elements here now that we have this main functionality of our game and our game controls worked out. So let's continue on now and let's get into the really fun stuff. Okay, now that we have that main control of our game working, the movement of the snake and the placing of the body segments, I think now is the time to give our game a little bit more energy and spice it up a little bit since we're going to be doing more testing of gameplay as we go forward now. Now we're getting to the fun stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to the stage here and I'm going to go ahead and come over to sounds and I want to give this game some sound effects once the game is being played. So if you come up here, you can check the sound effects. You can obviously load your own, you can record your own, but Scratch has some built-in sounds here. So I'm going to look under loops here because I want some sort of game loop. So if I hover over the play button, with any of these I can sort of get a preview of what it's going to sound like. I'm going to come down to this video game loop here, and I think that's going to sound pretty cool with this game here. So I like that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab that video game loop here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to come back to my code. And I want this to play as soon as the game starts. So I'm on the stage here. I'm going to go events. And I'm going to go when I receive start game. And again, this is why it's good to have these game flow broadcast messages when I receive start game. And so then I'm going to have it play this sound. And so I'm going to have it play sound here, play sound, video game 2. And then, of course, I just want this in a forever loop because I want this to continuously play. So if I do forever, let me get this out of here, forever play sound, video game 2. And I put this under when I receive start game. Let's test that out and see what this does, see if this works. So start game. And so, yes, now we have some nice musical sound effects to go along with our game flow here. So that is pretty cool. And I think I also want some sort of sound effect when we eat the food. So again, I'll come under sounds and I'm going to go in to add a new sound here. And you could record a sound, but again, I'm just going to choose a sound from the existing library that comes here in MIT Scratch. And I'm going to go down and I am going to find this one that I believe is called Chomp. So let's see down here, Chomp. So if I preview that sound, yeah, that sounds like what I want there. So I'm going to grab that block right there, that chomp block, and I'll just come back to my code. And right here, whenever I receive eat food, we're going to create the clone of snake body, but we're also just going to play that sound. So let's come there and play sound until done. We'll play that chomp sound. And so now if I just come into the game and we'll just test this again real quick, start game. So we have our sound effects there with the music. And then now we also get that chomp sound anytime we eat a food pellet. So those are just a few little gameplay elements that make it a little bit more enjoyable for your player. And so let's get on and continue with the functionality of this game. Because of course right now, there's no way to die. I can go backwards over myself. I can turn into my body segments and not die. I can go into the side of the screen and come out and not die. And those are all instances where I want the player to die. If you run into your body, if you run into the side of the board. And you can see also I managed to, by going off the screen, throw it off, and I've lost the body segment there. So there are a couple things we definitely have to make happen. So we have to have some awareness of whether we're running back over ourselves, whether we're running into the side of the screen. And so let's code those things out now. Okay, so let's start tackling a few more gameplay elements. As it stands right now, there's no way to die. So we want to come in here and change that. So I'm back here on the snake head. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another little check here that runs when we receive start game. So as soon as we start the game, so when I receive start game, and again, I like to sometimes separate out these blocks, so this code will just run concurrently with this, so you're not waiting on any of this other stuff. So when I receive start game, I want to immediately go into a forever loop. So let's come down here under control forever. And inside this loop, I want to always be checking if we are touching the snake body, any of the snake body clones. So if, and we're going to drag that in there, and then we're going to go under sensing block, and we're going to grab this touching. And under touching here, we are going to choose snake body. And anytime we are touching the snake body, we then want to move to the end of game. So we want to end game. So I'm going to create a new broadcast message to handle that. So I'm going to come here under events and we'll broadcast end game. So if I come in here and new message, we'll call this one end game. End game. Okay. And then I like to sometimes handle messages like this on the main stage here. And so when I receive end game, and when I do that, remember we have that game flow variable. So let me come under the variables here, and then I want to change and set this game flow variable. If you remember, 0 was the start screen, and now that we're in the game, we set that to 1, and now we're going to set it to 2. Now I could just change by 1, but I can also directly set it using this block here. So we're going to change this to 2, and that's going to mean end game. See, if you remember right here, 1 equals gameplay, 2 equals show high scores, and that's basically our end game there. Okay, so we're going to want to have some other things attached to this end game message. So if I come back to my snake body here, I will drag out another when I receive end game. So when I receive end game, and so what we're going to do here is we're going to come under here under control, and we'll grab this stop block, and we'll have it stop all other scripts in this sprite. And then we also want to remove the clones that we've created. So all the body segments, we're gonna delete this clone. If we do this again, this script is on all of the clones, right? So all of them should disappear when I do this. Now ultimately I might want to do some sort of animation, but for now I think I'm just gonna have it delete these clones. And I also might want to put some sort of sound effect to indicate that I've died. So maybe I'm gonna come back under my backdrop. I'm going to look for sounds, and let me just jump back here into this little sound library. So I'm going to do a new sound, and I don't know what the different sounds are in here, but so maybe this bonk here might be a good one for when my snake crashes. So I have this bonk sound now. So let me just go back out into my code. And again, when I receive endgame, so we will play that sound. So we'll go under our sounds here, and we're going to play sound bonk until done. So let's just confirm that those few things we've set up so far are working. So start game, we'll go along, and okay, so I've noticed now that sometimes my body segment is being placed incorrectly. So again, that is something we're going to have to bug a little bit farther and tighten that up, because it's not always placing a new body segment. I think what's happening is it's placing it on top of the existing one, and the spacing isn't quite right. So I need to improve that, but for now, let's see if I can back over myself. No, I cannot. So I got that death sound, and it got rid of my items on screen, my body segments. Of course, I need to add something to get rid of the head to stop the music. So we have some more work to do here, and we have a little bit of debugging to do. But this is invariably the type of stuff you're going to run into as you develop a game. You're going to go back and forth through the cycle of development where you're debugging, you're trying new things. So let's come over to the head, and right here, I will do when I receive end game. So when I receive end game, we're also going to stop all the scripts in this sprite. So we'll grab this stop all scripts in this sprite. And we're also going to get rid of the clone. So there actually isn't a clone here. There's just this one here. So we'll just hide. We can hide this guy. So we'll hide this guy here so we don't see him anymore. Now we want to stop those sound effects. So here on the stage, we have this play sound, forever play sound. And so in forever in here, we don't want to play this if the game flow reaches that final end game stage, which we set to 2. So that's the game flow variable. So I could just go in here under control, and we could say if game flow. So let's just see. So let's just grab that variable. Here's my game flow variable. And then we need some sort of comparison operator. And so once it goes above 1, this is going to start when the game starts, but then once it goes above 1 to 2, we don't want it to play anymore. So we only want it to play if it's 1 or less. So if game flow is less than 2, so let's grab this less than here. So if game flow is less than 2, and that means that this should stop now. If I encapsulate this here within this loop within my forever statement, then that should stop. And we could do one more thing. We could just change to sort of like an end game screen. So under my UI elements here, I could come in here, and when clicked show, and also at the beginning, I want to set that costume to the first costume. So looks, just because we're going to be adding another one here. So switch costume to costume 1. But now when I receive end game, so let's add another costume first. So let's just come in here, and this is just going to be a very simple, so here, paint new costume, and this one this is going to be text. So we're just going to say end game, or just do a game over message. So game over, and again I can change this to something different at some point. But for now it's just going to be a game over message like this. We'll center it. And it can stay centered at 0, 0 when the game is over. And this is costume 2. So if we come back to our code now, we would do something like go under events, when I receive game over, or excuse me, when I receive end game. And this is why these broadcast messages, again, you can have them communicate with different elements of your game, and it makes sure everything is coordinated. So this can be really valuable. So when I receive end game, and then we're also just going to switch the costume. So looks, we are going to go to, we could just go to next costume, because at the beginning of the game, it's going to be in the game flow, and it's going to be in this costume 1. So if we just go to next costume, it should go to that end game screen. So let's test all this out again. We know we still have to debug this thing of body segments, where it's not always getting the body segment quite right. See how that one got added too far back. So we will deal with that in a minute. But for now, let's just go through, and then if I try to back over myself, or if I turn into myself, it's going to get rid of everything. Okay, so it did not stop the music, which I wanted it to do, and I don't have that game over screen. So it did stop the music eventually, and I think that's because I have that block that says play until done. Okay, so the music did eventually stop, but we're not seeing our end game costume. So again, let's just back out of here, and I probably did something silly, but let's see what's going on. When I receive end game next costume. Okay, so what happens here is I think we hide it up here, and we need to show it again when we come back here. And we'll also just make sure that it's centered in the screen. So I'm just going to go under my looks. We're going to find this next block, show, next costume, show, and then we'll also just make sure that it's at 0, 0. That's going to be the center of the screen. So we'll just do those couple things, 0, 0, and then we'll go ahead and we will play this one more time. And just very quickly here, I'm going to eat the one pellet. I'm going to try to back over myself. And boom, there we have the game over message. So it's mostly working. I may have to do something to clean up that sound to see if I can immediately stop that sound. But we're getting there. We have more to the bug now. So let's go back and see if we can do something to tighten up sort of the placing of the new body segment and make sure that it's occurring right after that snake moves so that we get our body segment placement perfect every time. Okay, so back out here in my script for the stage, we have this play video sound until done, and that's why when the game ends, you still get that sound for a little while, but we can stop that if we go under control here, and we have when this game ends, we play this bonk sound, but we could also make it stop the other scripts here. So we could have it come in here, and we could stop the other scripts in this sprite. So if I drag this out and do stop other scripts in this sprite, and I could play that instantly when the game ends there. And so now if I come back and just play this real quick, again, we're now just debugging a step at a time. So now if I come through here and I run this, I can eat something. You can see that boom, instantly the other sound stops when the game's over, so that's good. So that's an improvement if we want. Now you remember also we have the problem where the body segments on our snake aren't always getting positioned perfectly. So let's just look at our script here. So we have this move snake here, so it's moving along, and then we have here the food, and we have, let's stop this, this testing here, if touching head, then it broadcasts eat food, and then actually within that eat food script, so if I just find that here, that's where we have it creating the clone of a snake body. I think I'd actually like to put that sort of in its own segment here. So I'm going to come back here, and so I'm going to duplicate this eat food, and I'll get rid of this extra place food here. I'll get rid of that one, and we're going to broadcast a new message here. So we're going to broadcast eat food. We're also going to broadcast a new message called grow snake. Okay, and that way I can come back out here, and it's just a little cleaner to separate it out like this, I think. So I'm going to go under my vents here. When I receive grow snake, and that's going to fire, and so that's where we're going to move this over here to create a clone of snake body. And then if we go to the actual head here, we can see right here, and I think this is sort of why we're getting that problem where sometimes our body segment is a little too far back, because I have it adding the XY position to the list, and then it's waiting 5 seconds, and then it's going through all of this, and then it's broadcasting the move snake. And when I broadcast the move snake, that's when, if we come back over here onto our snake body, that's when the position actually updates here. When I receive move snake, then it's changing the position by 1. And so really what I want to have happen is if I come back to the head here, is I want to separate this out, and I actually want to put these two blocks much closer to when I call that broadcast move snake. So I'm going to put them just before that. And I think if I do that, that's going to sort of clean up the problem of having our body segments lag behind. But let's just test that out. So I'm going to come in here now, and we'll go ahead and start game. And let's just play this for a second. And so far so good, but let's just go with it out a little bit longer. So far so good. So this seems like, at least initially, that I've cleaned that up. And you can see how easy it is to have these game flow issues in your control structure where just certain codes aren't executed time-wise where you need them to. So I needed these two to be happening right close together so they're synchronized, and it does seem like now we've cleaned that up and fix that problem. So you'll get into this back and forth where you need to fix problems in your game, but just stay patient and you will be able to make those fixes. Okay, so that is where we're going to end part 2, but if you want to see part 3, it is linked up on the screen here, as well as in the comments below. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you back here soon. Thanks so much.